Prologue, the hunter. The freezing wind howled in his ears. Snow flurried all around him in a thick sheet of white, making visibility past a few feet nearly impossible. He rubbed the melted snow off his rosy cheeks and licked his dry, crusted lips. The blizzard will help impair her vision. Not only that, but her judgment will be clouded too. He mused on this, picturing his next victim struggling against the fierce blizzard, pushing through the ice-cold gusting winds and whirling blinding flakes, desperate to reach the safety of her car across the parking lot. She wouldn't see him approaching. The storm would see to that. Blood ran back into his mouth as his smile split the skin of his dry lips. He licked at the blood eagerly and hugged tighter to the side of the dumpster, peering into one of the worst blizzards in years, waiting for his prize. He had never seen a more perfect specimen. The others were poor imitations of the woman he had laid eyes upon in the fuzzy black and white screen mere hours before. Even with the terrible quality of the outdated camera, her beauty was unmistakable. He had tipped right out of the chair at the speed he rose to leave the security office. He needed to see more than the outdated camera technology could show him. He had promised himself he wouldn't collect another prize so soon. After all, the search was still active for his previous prize, but he could not help himself. The mall was bustling with holiday spirit as Halloween shoppers filled every corner. Storefronts were adorned with jack-o'-lanterns and cobwebs, while eerie music floated through the air. Costumed children darted between stores, their laughter mingling with the spooky decorations. "I'm just going to check on the store. Make sure there isn't any trouble. No harm in just looking. I'm just window shopping." His teeth released a slight hiss as they grinded together. He knew the perfect spot to stand in the beauty store was the second-story balcony above the perfume section. It had an insurmountable vantage point to peer down the shirts of the woman below while keeping him inconspicuous under the guise that he was on the hunt for shoplifters. It was there his perfect prize was waiting for him. She was browsing several perfumes, one of which being a rose scent that was his very favorite. His heart fluttered as he watched her spray it on her neck and rub it in almost seductively as if she was begging him to claim her. All his other prizes hated the rose smell. They would scream bloody murder when he would spray it on their soft skin and press his nose against it to smell the mixture of flesh and chemical. She began to take her large coat off, revealing massive breasts on a slim figure. He could feel himself stiffening against the glass railing. His grip tightened around the handle as he yearned for her. Perfect. She can't be any more perfect. Black hair, as dark as midnight, the smell of a field of roses, just like Mother. And how can I forget the pair of tits the size of watermelons? But it is too soon for another prize. The last one probably isn't even cold in her barrel yet. I need to let her go. He exhaled deeply, letting go of the idea, setting the fish free of the hook. He released the handrail and was about to walk away when he took one last adoring glance down at his most perfect prize. He just wanted one last look, one last gaze through the window at the item he would always want but could never buy. Below, his prize was waiting for him. Her gentle pale blue eyes met his. They almost seemed to glow in the intense fluorescent lighting. She gave him a cute smile and waved bashfully. His cock quickly became as hard as a rock. "She will be mine. Damn, how soon it is. She will be my perfect prize." He watched her from the security room for the rest of the day, waiting for the perfect moment. She bounced from store to store for several hours. It gave him time to think of a plan. He would tie her up with the soft rope and zip ties to preserve the softness of her skin and to not leave any marks. He would use the chloroform rag to knock her unconscious rather than strangling her. No, that would bruise too much on the neck. He agreed that he would be more careful with this prize to preserve her perfection for as long as possible, if not forever. His cock would often engorge at random sights of her peering at the camera, as if she were begging him to hurry up and take her. He would lock the security door and pleasure himself to her image, fantasizing what he would do once they were safely in his basement. The mall began to clear quickly. The storm of the century was approaching, and so was his opportunity to claim his prize. He watched her heading for the exit doors on the security camera and quickly sped out the side door and ducked between the two dumpsters near the exit. The poorly maintained hinges screeched to life and were followed by soft footsteps in the growing snow. In his excitement, he jumped from his position between the two dumpsters and began to close the distance. He could see her black hair flapping in the wind like a flag atop a pole. He took a moment to ensure the lot was completely empty. He had already taken care of the security cameras. They were going to have an unexpected maintenance update that would leave them off for the next hour. She'd disappear without a trace, like all of the prizes before her. "Excuse me, ma'am?" His perfect prize kept walking. "She can't hear me because of the wind. Damn!" He attempted to run, which quickly became an awkward shuffle as his feet slid in the built-up snow and ice. He repeatedly shouted for his prize to stop, almost begging. She reached her SUV and opened the trunk when she finally turned around. She smiled again, which set his loins ablaze. "Is there a problem, officer?" She was a flirt. He loved a flirt. "Oh, you are too kind, but I am just a humble security guard." His heart ached for her. "Unfortunately, there is a small problem." He adjusted his utility belt, gripping the damp rag in one of the many pockets. "We have some suspicions that you may have shoplifted here at the Mount Zebulun Mall. Now, if you won't mind providing me with a receipt for all your purchased items today, I will need to review them for what is currently on your person." His hand fiddled with the damp rag again, waiting for the perfect moment to press it against her nose and mouth. The exhilarating scene played out in his mind, her eyes rolling into the back of her head as she crumbled into his arms. "Certainly. Watching me a lot today? Officer Codd, is it?" She read his name tag, adding in the officer once again, with a raise of her eyebrow. In the darkness of the night, her eyes were so bright and glowing. "Let me just grab that out of my purse for you." She turned away from him and reached into the trunk. He approached slowly with the rag now fully out of his pocket. "I'm sorry, officer. I promise I'm not trying to keep us in this cold. I just can't seem to find the receipt." "Oh, it is quite all right, my darling. Take all the time you need." His tongue licked his bloody smile. He was only a step behind her. All he needed to do was lunge forward, and she was his. "Well, the funny thing is that the only thing that I bought was this perfume. Oh, it is just lovely." His pace slowed. "Would you like to smell it?" He paused. It was like he was living in a dream. No one has ever willingly let me sniff the perfume off them. His perfect prize turned around quickly, brandishing the perfume gently in both hands. She smiled again, only this time it was all wrong. Where it once was sweet and innocent was now a twisted and sinister sneer. She sprayed the perfume directly on his face. He stumbled backwards, his eyes and sinuses burning. He did not scream or shout, but released a surprised gasp of air, which only made the chemicals work faster. It did not smell like roses, but of disinfectants and hospital beds. It was a smell of his own secret trade he had become quite accompanied with, only normally from a safe distance. The chemical did its job quickly, and he never felt the ground before he was completely and totally unconscious. Chapter 1. Closure Without Conviction. "Honey, it's coming from the computer," Karen Hand shouted from the living room. The sound had started as a buzzing that reminded Karen of her youth and using dial-up internet. It had woken the Hands up from a deep sleep at 1 a.m. The dial-up sound had turned to a robotic voice saying, "You've got mail," by the time Danny Hand joined his wife. When Danny entered the room, the computer began to flash a countdown. "What the hell?" Danny asked while he tapped at the keyboard. Nothing happened. "Danny, I'm scared. Please get it to stop." "I'm trying. Damn thing's got a mind of its own." The computer continued to tick down. When it reached 1, it flashed one more time, and a video began to play. Karen gripped Danny's shoulder tightly. A burned man was tied to a chair, and the camera was zoomed so only the man was in frame. "What is this?" "Karen, call the cops." Karen rushed up the stairs to grab her phone from the nightstand. "Where are the other two bodies, Eddie? Ruth Barlow and Jesse Hand?" A distorted voice played through the computer speakers. Karen stopped in her tracks, the phone dropping from her hand. Danny was in the same trance at the sound of his missing daughter's name. Karen placed a hand on her husband's back, and together they watched the rest of the film. Chapter 2. Executioner's Delight. Blurry lines of light filled his vision. His neck was stiff as he moved his head up from his chest. A string of drool mixed with blood broke its connection from his chest. He was naked and strapped to a metal chair with his arms bound behind his back. Three metal contraptions with long poles and hoses surrounded him. He did not know what they were, but the homemade nature of the structures made them feel unstable and dangerous. His stomach turned at the thought of what they might be used for. He struggled against the rough ropes that bound him, burning his skin as he pulled rapidly against them. "It is pointless to struggle," a voice came from behind the bright spotlight that blinded him from the rest of the room. "Who are you? What do you want with me?" he screamed in panic. She stepped into the light, a small smirk across her lips. "Who I am won't matter much to you, at least not for much longer." She chuckled softly. "All you need to know, Edward Codd, is that I am someone who truly hates your kind." Edward recognized her more clearly. She was still a beautiful woman, but her face lacked the makeup that made her perfect for him. Seeing her imperfections and blemishes enraged him. "You? But—" He looked around the room and tried to squint past the bright lights. "Ma'am, if this is about the shoplifting, then I promise if you let me go, we will be square." His mind went to their last interaction, believing the woman had truly shoplifted and had only attacked him to get away with her crime. "You think this is about your little ploy to abduct me? Oh, Eddie, 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 you've found yourself in the spider's web." Edward was confused about his situation, but his disdain for the way she looked was plain on his face. She deceived him. "What's wrong, Eddie? Can't handle a woman without a pound of makeup covering all her blemishes and wrinkles?" She reached under her shirt and came back with a stuffed bra and threw it at his feet with a smirk. "Or is it my lack of breasts that could also function as a flotation device?" she asked with false innocence. Edward's heart dropped. "Not the tits too," he thought in horror. "Why? Why are you doing this to me? I'm just a mall cop. I don't have any money for you to steal. Please, just let me go." The woman began to laugh softly again. "Your mother hated imperfections. She wore enough makeup to disguise her age, and enough of that shit rose perfume to be flammable if someone lit a match near her. She hated you for destroying her once flawless body and made you feel as though you could never meet her high expectations for physical beauty." Edward was instantly enraged. "Don't you talk about my mother, cunt!" He shook his chair and tried to jump out of it. He wanted to strangle this deceiver of a woman. "There he is! Show me the monster out of his cage, Eddie. Mommy liked to dye her hair black, and she kept it long and straight, didn't she? You loved to touch it, and then touch yourself later thinking about it. Did you want to fuck Mommy, Eddie?" With every word, her face twisted, and her glowing eyes pierced him to his very core. "I will fucking kill you!" The ropes cut deeply into his arms, but he ignored the pain and pushed his legs to stand. The bolts holding the chair in place kept him firmly glued to the ground. "Tell me, Eddie, were you thinking about Mommy's fake tits when you exploded into that crusty sock of yours?" Edward tried to stand from the chair once more. He'd bend the steel if it meant crushing the woman's windpipe under his hands. The woman did not flinch in the slightest at his attempted advances. Edward's head whipped to the side as he heard a small hiss coming from the metal structure in front of him. A moment later, a clear liquid spurted from the nozzle and onto his face and chest. Its smell was sweet like a field of roses. The fragrance relaxed his body for only a moment before the pain set in. An intense heat began to bubble under his skin where the liquid had touched. "What the hell is this?" He shrieked with pain, his eyelids forcing themselves shut from the swelling. "What did you do to me?" The woman inhaled deeply through her nose. "Can you not smell it, Eddie? You forcefully pressed your face against so many women for this aroma. I thought you'd be a little more grateful." She snickered at his expression. "Well, I guess there is one extra ingredient you need to complete your high, isn't there? Flesh?" He could barely see the small light forming on the tip of the hose. When the second burst of spray came, it arrived as a wave of fire. He screamed in agony. His body steamed and his flesh turned a violent color of red as blood dripped through the burnt cracks. Through the pain, he managed to open his eyes, seeing clearly how much danger he was truly in. Attached just below each nozzle was a small blowtorch. "What the fuck do you want with me, bitch? To give me a therapy lesson?" Edward spat at her. Your first victim, Angelica Harding, looked exceptionally like your mom, only she didn't have black hair. When the police recovered her body in a steel barrel that had washed up on the side of the river, they found Angelica's blonde hair had been dyed black. There were trace amounts of rose perfume on her legs, arms, and breasts. Angelica's family informed the police that she was severely allergic to most perfumes and would never willingly put it on. Is that why you killed her? I don't know what the fuck you are talking about. Ah, fuck! The electrical hiss of the generator turning on and then rapidly back off rang through his ears. His muscles clenched as another wave of fire hit him on the side. You see, Eddie, I want to play a game. You answer my questions honestly and swiftly, or else. She held up a small remote with her finger hovering over one of the buttons threateningly. Well, let's just say I'll have a freshly roasted cod on my hands. She flashed another devilish grin. Edward's panic skyrocketed as he looked into her eyes. They were not the eyes of some innocent girl. Her eyes would light up at the same time as the blowtorch in anticipation of the pain he would receive. This woman was no stranger to violence and seemingly preferred it. Her eyes were those of a killer. She knew too much about Angelica already for him to lie his way out of this situation. Her skin bubbled up and swelled wherever Mother's roses touched it. The sores eventually began to pus and ooze. She wasn't a good prize anymore. I had to ditch her. So you killed her, put her in a barrel, and threw her into the river? Yes, I slit her throat and dumped her corpse in the barrel, he admitted. He was barely able to get the last word out before fire rained down on him from the sides. I told you what would happen if you lied. Her voice lost its playfulness, only leaving the rage and anger. You know damn well you put her in that barrel alive. There were scratches on the inside of the barrel. Paint chips collected under her nails as she tried to claw her way to freedom. Are you a cop or something? That wasn't released to the papers, Edward whimpered. He was losing all sensation in his arms and legs. Pain consumed him, and he gaped at the flesh that looked more like jerky than human. Look, if you are after a confession, I will give it to you. Just please let me go. I won't ever tell a soul who you are. I'm the fucking devil, Eddie. Do you really think all I care about is a confession? I want to taste your fear and agony as I put you through a worse hell than your victims, she sneered. Fluid ran down Edward's legs. He didn't know if it was piss, blood, or both. It formed a brown pool beneath the chair. His whole body shook, and tears fell uncontrollably down his cheeks. Where are the other two bodies, Eddie? Ruth Barlow and Jessie Hand? I don't. Ah! All three hoses blasted him at the same time, and he was briefly encased in a tomb of fire. You really don't think that I know when you are lying? I almost had you figured out right after you abducted Ruth. Two girls with similar features disappearing with their last known location being the same mall? A mall whose security cameras conveniently went out around the same time as the abductions? Didn't anyone ever tell you not to piss where you sleep? I assumed you were stalking them home and abducting them in a secluded area. I failed to assume a coward like you would be bold enough to risk grabbing them in the parking lot. I dressed exactly how I knew you wanted a woman to be, down to the T with the perfume. Then Jessie Hand vanished. She was just slightly more perfect for you, with her large breasts. Once she disappeared, I knew what I needed to sweeten the honey pot. Sure enough, the second I saw you standing above the perfume aisle, I knew exactly who I was hunting. Edward remembered the perfect smile she had given him when they had first made eye contact. The memory almost made his cock hard with the thought of how perfect she was. He understood now why she had smiled so brightly. After spending several hours waiting for you to make your move and never seeing it come, I realized what your plan was. You would use your very limited power and authority to stop me under the suspicion of shoplifting, using this to get close for the attack and abduction. Thanks to the very trace amount of chloroform you used to poison Angelica, I knew your method would require close contact and taking your victim somewhat unaware. All I had to do was set the trap for you to walk into, which you did perfectly. She pushed the remote against his chin and tilted his head up to meet her eyes. He had never met such a unique set of beautiful eyes, and he'd never feared anything more. I buried them, he spurted out quickly. I kept Ruth in my garage for a month because I didn't know what to do with her after they found Angelica so quickly, so I buried them both just off the Aspen Trail. How deep? Just enough to cover the barrels. There's still fresh dirt. I could lead you to them. Just please let me go. I promise I am telling you the truth. You know what, Eddie? I believe you. So you are going to let me go? Spread, something like that. She pushed the button. What little was left of his hope faded like the darkness in the room. He took one last inhale of the sweet fragrance, the smell of his own burning flesh adding to the mixture. The woman had finished with her toy, just as he had so many times with his own. Her contraptions were set to maximum strength. The wall of fire that would be his doom was hotter than all the previous bursts combined. Just before it hit, he saw his mother's lovely face smiling at him through the flames. The pain was immense and quickly cleared his deliria. He couldn't hold back his screams any longer, as flesh burned away to bone. The woman was staring down at him, half her face tucked behind a small video camera. A wicked smile peered out just beneath it. The smile told him all he needed to know. No one would ever find his body, and no one would ever find his killer. Chapter 3: Dumping Grounds. The base of the thin hiking trail was surrounded by emergency vehicles, reporters, and curious bystanders. Signs of the blizzard from the night before could still be seen on the trees and roads. Sheets of pure white blanketed everything in sight. Authorities arrived at the Aspen hiking trail early this morning. Sources say they are continuing their investigation of two missing girls, Ruth Barlow and Jessie Hand, who both went missing after a trip to the Mount Zebulon Mall. The reporter spoke into her microphone in a monotone voice. A detective passed behind her and under the yellow tape. The detective shifted her head awkwardly. The mass of black hair forced underneath a winter beanie kept shifting and threatened to burst out. "Goddamn cold," she muttered to herself. Each breath hurt as she moved up the slim trail and into a sea of aspen trees. She could see the group of cops and construction workers just slightly ahead. "Detective Knight!" One of the uniformed officers waved her down. "What's the word, George?" Detective Knight asked the red-nosed officer. "Same thing as the last time," George said nervously. Both the Barlows and the Hands called in frantically about their computers, playing some type of snuff film of the alleged killer of their daughters being tortured and eventually murdered. This, Edward Codd, said he buried the girls alive just off this trail. Officer George paused for a moment. He was very clearly disturbed by what he had to say next. Right before he was burned alive. Officer George led her off the beaten path and towards a dig site where workers in heavy coats were excavating. Fuck, were the families able to save the video? George shook his head. His bright red hair briefly appeared with the movement of his hat. No, both said their computers crashed right after the video ended, and when it came back, there was no trace of the video ever existing. Fuck, Detective Knight said softly to herself. Then more loudly, "Someone get me a crowbar." One of the men who had been digging had just pulled out a large blue barrel. With a loud pop, the top flew off. The aroma that filled the area was nauseating. Detective Knight placed a hand over her nose and willed her heart to peer into the barrel. The rotting corpse was in the fetal position and leaning against the inside of the barrel. Some of the skin had fused itself to the plastic and stretched out like a greenish tan taffy across the sides. "It's Ruth Barlow! Someone, get the coroner up here!" Detective Knight shouted back to the large crowd of officers behind her. Detective Knight quickly examined the inside of the barrel to see the deep indents where Ruth had tried to claw her way out. Her heart sank and her stomach twisted. She had truly thought Ruth still might be alive. She walked calmly to the opposite tree line of the other officers, leaned over, and vomited. "Detective, are you—" Officer George began to ask. "I'm fine. Just get Violet up here." She wiped away the excess spit from her mouth. The Bloody Mary she'd consumed earlier that night turned the snowdrift a violent red. She resumed her cool composure and took a deep breath of the freezing cold air. The reporters and onlookers nearly went up in a frenzy when they saw the black van pulling into the parking lot. The second she stepped out of the driver's seat, there was an eruption of words. It was all different, each trying to say the same thing, just in a different and unique way. A body had been found. Violet did her best to ignore the noise. She didn't have the best memories of mass gatherings of reporters. She zipped her jacket all the way to her neck. Her assistant medical examiner was rolling the stretcher out of the back. You'd think they would have a little more respect for the families. What if we haven't told them yet? They've got to find out from the news that their loved one's corpse has been found. What if it isn't the right corpse? Jack, you are giving logic to beings who thrive on emotions. They act on what they feel, not what they think. Someone woke up philosophical this morning, Jack laughed as he assisted Violet with pushing the stretcher up the hill. So, are you going to tell me about him? You are only like this after you had a good night the day before. Violet smiled. You could say something like that. Fine, keep your secrets, he huffed as they continued on. What is that smell? Jack held his jacket to his nose as he pushed up the remainder of the hill. They could smell the body far before they reached it. Death, Violet responded calmly, seemingly undisturbed by the smell. The odor of death is potent on normal terms, but when the gases that occur during the decomposition are trapped in a contained area, they build up and grow more concentrated. By the time they reached the dig site, the second barrel had just been unearthed. Violet watched as Detective Knight placed a crowbar under the sealed lid and lifted it. She prepared for a burst of smell like the one that still lingered from the first barrel. The pop of the lid separating rang through the silence of the trees, but no foul odor came. It doesn't stink, she said just above a whisper. It smells like shit up here. What do you mean? Violet did not answer. Instead, she moved to the detective's side. Serenity. She is not. Detective Knight turned and faced her with concern. Look. Even up close, the barrel did not reek. The body of Jessie Hand was discolored and bloody, but her chest moved with shallow breaths. Help me get her out of here, Serenity whispered. Together they tipped the barrel as 20 others watched in silence. Jessie's breathing quickened. She is alive. The crowd let out a very audible gasp. Jack, bring the stretcher over here. She is going to need medical attention. The firefighters assembled around the barely alive body of Jessie Hand and lifted her onto the stretcher together. They pushed her down the hill to where an ambulance was already waiting to take her to the hospital. Serenity felt a tear form in her eyes. I didn't fail them both. Are you okay, Serenity? Violet asked. Serenity hugged the smaller figure next to her with all her might. Thanks, sis, she whispered in Violet's ear. For a second, Violet's heart jumped. Does she even know what she's thanking me for? You are suffocating me, Violet complained as she tried to pull out of Serenity's grasp. Jack looked at the firefighters taking away his stretcher and then back at the rotting corpse that was still in the first barrel. They are going to bring that back up when they are done, right? That was a bit of a bitch to get up here, you know? Serenity released her younger sister. Right, sorry. This is still a crime scene. Jack, leave the evidence bag and go get the second stretcher out of the van. Yes, ma'am. He gave a mocking salute and trudged back down the hill. Violet removed the camera from the evidence bag and attached the flash. She photographed the dig site and the two barrels. She paused and stared into the soulless black pits where Ruth's eyes had decayed away. She brought the camera back up to her eye and photographed the corpse. Can you get the scratches on the inside of the barrel too? Serenity asked. Violet nodded her head and photographed it. Do you see her fingers? Serenity pointed, and Violet photographed the skeletal nubs. She rubbed the skin away, trying to claw her way out. I'd say down to the muscle underneath, which decayed to the bone. The man who did this to her was a monster. Was? Talking about him in the past tense already? Did you make an arrest, or do we have another crime scene for me to examine? Violet asked without removing her eye from the camera scope. No crime scene, no body, no evidence. Just a taped confession shown to the families, just like the others. A killer killing killers. It's real fucked up if you ask me. Violet's camera continued to click away. Any leads on him? Who? The fucker that did this or the fucker that killed him? The question would apply to both. Violet could hear the stretcher coming up the hill. Its wheels bounced loudly on the rocks, and Jack's panting was loud enough to cause an earthquake. Not that I know of. Rodriguez and Jacobs were assigned to the case after the second victim confessed and was subsequently murdered. Given we are on number 5 now, I would say they are doing a wonderful job. She smiled sarcastically and stood up. She brushed off the knees of her pants even though there wasn't any dirt on them. Are you leaving? Violet held the camera to her side and looked up at her older sister. Yeah, I have a dead killer to find, and maybe I'll find a lead on his killer. I refuse to close another case without the killer being behind bars. Besides, I'd at least like to find the body this time. Not likely, Violet thought to herself. Good luck. She knew to give her sister a reassuring smile. Thanks. Serenity said as she began to walk away. Maybe the bastard got cocky and forgot to cover his tracks. Those tracks were paved over with tar and asphalt before a building was erected on top of them. You'd have better luck finding a penny at the bottom of the sea. She kept the smile plastered on as Jack pushed the stretcher up to the barrel. Good God, what does that to human flesh? Decomposition. Rigor mortis can cause the top layer to loosen from the body. Given she is in a compact barrel, the fluids of decomposition can make the loose skin very sticky like globs of glue, hence the spider web pattern across the sides. The greenish hue would be a sign of active decay. Violet looked up at her assistant with a raised eyebrow. Jack was examining the body with a greenish hue to his own face. Violet cleared her throat. Jack quickly looked down at her. Sorry, it's just, this is one of the most horrifying things I have ever seen. How are you so calm? Experience and time. It'll kill that sensitivity in you. Now, if you wouldn't mind, please document the analysis so we can get her out of this barrel and back to the morgue. I think she deserves a better place to rot than here, don't you? Jack nodded slowly. You can regret your life choices on the way back. Right now, we have a job to do. Chapter 4, Speaker for the Dead. Why is it so bittersweet? Violet thought as she watched the reactions of the Barlow family. When Violet pulled the sheet back, revealing the corpse of their young daughter on a steel table, Jennifer Barlow gripped her husband and became hysterical. John Barlow simply held his wife and stared deeply into the soulless pits of his dead daughter's eye sockets. Violet could tell John was hurting just as bad as his wife, if not worse. Most men believe it is their job to protect their loved ones at all costs. Seeing his wife in so much agony, he can't help but blame himself. He wasn't strong enough, not available enough, not devoted enough. Violet could see it all happening in his blank stare. The guilt mixed with the loss is combining into a perfect storm of depression and anguish, all while he must try and comfort his grieving wife for a being she grew inside of her, bore the pain of childbirth for, and loved with every inch of herself. She harbored hope that there was the slimmest chance that she could still be alive, and now she had to look at her mutilated corpse. Violet analyzed every inch of it all, as she had done so many times before, with so many other mourning families, and she yearned to feel a tenth of what they were feeling. I'm sorry, but I will need you to identify the body. Is this your daughter, Ruth Barlow? She asked somberly. Jennifer Barlow released a scream into her husband's chest. Yes, I'd recognize my baby girl's face anywhere, John replied with a shaky voice, fighting back tears in his eyes. I pray that man in the video was the monster who killed our baby. Jennifer sobbed loudly into her husband's chest. I hope he burns in hell for the monstrosities he did to our baby girl. He burned. It just wasn't in hell, Violet thought. Do you need anything else from us, ma'am, or can we take her body with us? We would like to bury her as soon as possible, John asked. Violet recovered the body in the black tarp. I don't need anything else at this time. You may want to speak with Detective Knight to see if she needs anything further. Once the investigation has been closed, I will release the body to whatever funeral home you may choose. Think they will find him? John Barlow asked with murder behind his words. The man that did this to her? Not in a million years. Detective Knight is one of the best on the force. If anyone can find him, it is her. Violet left the family alone with the corpse to allow them to grieve and spend a moment with their child for the last time. Very few things could make her truly feel emotions, but watching strangers grieve for someone they loved with every ounce of their being was one of those things. She couldn't describe what exact emotion she felt, but she knew it wasn't the same emotion normal people felt when they are feeling sympathetic. Again, she yearned for anything that would dissipate the coldness in her heart. "Your parents loved you," she said aloud once the Barlows had left with rosy cheeks and reddened, swollen eyes. "You had some pretty good ones. What happened to your killer may have been a mercy had your parents found him first. Your mom wished you had been switched with Jessie Hand. She is fighting for her life right now in the ICU, but at least she has a chance. I'm sorry that we got to you so late." Edward Codd was an evil man, and worse, a cautious one. She leaned on the table and stared into the soulless, empty eye sockets. The eyes of the dead were always peculiar to her. To her, they froze the moment in time when the body passed its final breath and moved on to the great unknown. For some reason, that was comforting to her. "When I finally tracked him down, I made him pay for what he did to you and the others. I promise you, he will never do this to anyone else ever again." Violet looked at the cremator on the other side of the building. It was still warm from the night before. "No one will ever grieve for him or mourn for his sick life. I even made sure they wouldn't ever find a body to put in the ground. Edward Codd will fade away in every way except for being known as the sick creature that killed you." Violet placed a hand on her rapidly beating heart and made a small, genuine smile. "I know it is not the same to you, given you are already dead. I couldn't save you in time, and to be perfectly honest, I am no hero. I don't do what I do to save people. Jessie Hand was a positive collateral in this case, and to be even more honest, I don't truly understand why I do this. So, I am sorry I couldn't stop Edward Codd in time, but trust me when I say you have been avenged. Rest in peace, Ruth, and no, Edward never will." She set her souvenir in Ruth's palm and closed the rotting hand around it. It was so small that it would be confused as a speck of dust or a piece of skin that had dried up, which was Violet's goal. No one would ever guess what it was or who it used to belong to, but to Violet, it was the last piece of revenge that balanced the scales. Chapter 5. No evidence, no worries. "This place is a fucking pigsty," Serenity's voice echoed through Violet's phone. "You wouldn't believe the smell." "Typically, bad smells indicate a corpse," Violet said, trying to appease her sister's hope, knowing there would be no such thing in that apartment. "No, there isn't a body, just mountains of gas station hot dog boxes and fucking garbage everywhere. Violet, I have never seen this many used tissues. I have yet to see anything that isn't covered in this fucker's splooge. I'm going to have to tell the reporters tomorrow. Codd jerked himself to death." "Disgusting. Any real evidence to where he could be?" Violet asked with a hint of doubt forming in the back of her mind. In this line of business, the what-ifs can quickly eat you alive. "None that I can tell. Some clothes are missing from his closet, but they could easily be the many different pairs of clothing that are stiff as a board all over the fucking floor. Fuck. I didn't know someone could own so many fucking socks. Do you kiss your mother with that mouth?" There was a slight pause, and then she chuckled. "Sorry, it's seeing what he did to Ruth and Jessie. I just wanted to be the one that put him behind bars." Violet nodded her head in understanding, even though her sister couldn't see her. She felt similar when she wasn't the one putting them in the ground. "I know. There must be some type of lead. What about his workplace?" "Most malls have security cameras," she offered the advice. "Yeah, a normal mall has security guards that observe people to make sure they aren't stealing. This one has security guards that steal the customers. Their security tapes for the entire week miraculously corrupted last night, and Edward Codd never finished his shift. The morning crew came in, and the entire mall was unlocked, which means Mr. Codd was snatched before his shift ended." Violet could hear her sister wading through what sounded like a mound of cans and plastic bottles as she moved around Codd's apartment. "What do you mean? I thought you said some of his clothes were missing. Wouldn't that mean he packed a bag and ran?" Violet sat up slightly in her chair. "Maybe, or the guy who snatched him wanted me to think that." She certainly did, Violet thought. Think about it, Violet. This is the 5th time a murderer has been murdered. The murderer's victims receive a mysterious tape of the murderer's confession while being brutally tortured and then killed in a horrific and unnatural way. It doesn't help when we attempt to search for this alleged killer. There is no evidence and no trail to follow. All I am left with is some missing clothes. Like the original killer, suddenly realized a very cold case was about to burst into flames, and he ran for the hills. No, this killer of killers is a very crafty and careful individual. He wants us to think his victims are just on an extended holiday and not dead in a ditch somewhere. Hitting the nail right on the head there, sis. But I would never hide a body in a ditch. Too easy to find. Violet thought while making a mental note that her sister was now on to the pack-a-bag and make it look like they ran routine, and she needed to find a new diversion with the next victim. It almost sounds like you're trying to take over Rodriguez's case. Well, if those two would stop sharing a single brain cell, we would have caught this monster by now. Monster? The description caught Violet off guard. When she resumed composure, she was worried she sounded too offended. It was a rare break in her very calculated conversations. Violet, even your iron stomach would turn inside out at these snuff films. We need to stop him as much as we need to stop any other murderer. I don't care who his victims are. There was a pause between the two as neither said anything. Monster? No, the monster was the one putting people in barrels, dear sister. The one smashing heads in with a blunt object and disposing of them in a wood chipper was a monster, not me. I am the one who takes life from those who do not deserve it. I am the one who balances the scales. Did I lose you? Serenity asked. No, sorry. I thought I heard Jack, but it must have just been the wind, Violet lied. I didn't mean to spook you, little sis. You know I would do anything to protect you, right? Violet nodded her head slowly. I know. Anything will quickly fade if you find out who I really am. Anyways, Mom was asking about you the other day. She said you haven't talked in a few months. You should drop by whenever you have a chance. I'm sure she would love to see you. Violet rolled her eyes. Don't lie to me. I know you two don't always see eye to eye. We have never seen eye to eye, Violet interjected. Oh, you stop it. She is our mom. She loves you. Sure, she loves me. Then what is your problem? Her love for me is the equivalent of a little kid loving a pet fish. It's fun and exciting for a little while, and then they forget about it, neglect it, and it starves to death. Is the kid distraught when it dies? No. They cry for a minute and then dump it down the toilet and move on to the next best thing. Violet, that is ridiculous. When will you stop thinking that Mom dislikes you? The question was one that Violet thought of more than once and had come to a quite simple conclusion. When our dads become the same human being, the answer quickly brought the call to a standstill. Violet, you know she doesn't. Violet quickly realized she was breaking her own calculations again. The call was not supposed to go this way. Look, I need to finish up this paperwork. Sorry, Violet interjected quickly. Obel, the unfinished word echoed as Violet hung up the call. Violet placed a hand on her racing heart. On the opposite side of town, Serenity's heart was also racing, as the memories of her temporary father figure beat their ugly heads on a mental barrier that she had long tried to lock away forever in the farthest reaches of her mind. Serenity took a deep and slow breath to ease her anxiety. The messages she sent Violet contained several curse words before she eventually asked her to be at the press conference in the morning for moral support. Serenity rustled in her pocket for her keys and accidentally dropped them on the ground. Damn it. She leaned over and picked them up. When she leaned back up, she could see her reflection on the screen of a dusty ATM located next to the base of the stairs. A small smile crept across her lips, visions of a blurry image of her suspect dancing in her head. Chapter 6. Hunting for a Dream. She could hear the gentle scraping of the thing being dragged across the soft dirt. Violet, help me with this, his voice echoed through the field. Violet eagerly unbuckled herself from her seat in the car and jumped to the ground. She took off running through the soft dirt towards the voice. She is a heavy one. Help me out, baby girl, and lift the leg. He smiled kindly, as he always did, and she returned one just as gleeful. Her tiny hands could barely reach either side of the leg, and it took all her strength to lift it. You're the best helper in the whole wide world, baby girl. Now follow my lead and do your best to be silent. Yes, Daddy, she whispered, and helped her father drag the body deeper into the cornfield. She made sure to watch out for every fallen stalk. knowing the crunch of her boots would echo across the vacant field and anger her father. If he was angry, then he wouldn't let her go with him on his hunting trips. The black garbage bag swung loosely across his back, flapping gently in the cool breeze. Make sure not to get any blood on you. Your mom will be mighty angry if she sees your clothes have been stained. Yes, Daddy. She might even be mad enough to kill me, he laughed quietly. A giggle slipped through Violet's lips, and she quickly shushed herself. The last time she got blood on her shirt, her father had burned it in the fireplace and buried the ashes in a field 20 miles out of town. He was very angry and threatened to never take her on his hunting trips ever again. Thankfully, this one only had blood on her head, where her skull had been cracked open on the side. Daddy loves his hammers. Okay, Violet, set her down for a second. I need to catch my breath. The body fell to the ground with a hard and violent thump. Violet's father paced slowly back and forth between the rows of corn stalks. He took a deep breath and rested his hands on his hips. Violet crouched down and looked deeply into the bloodshot brown eyes of the dead woman. They were still frozen in fear, yet they almost looked to be easing into relief. It was as if she knew the end of her suffering was approaching, the end of her fear. Violet smiled at her. You know why we come out here, Vi? No, Daddy. Oh, yes, you do. You are 5, not a toddler, so don't play dumb with me. I don't want the same charade as you do with your mama. Why do we come out here? He stared down at her. Violet stood up straight as she always did when the anger flickered in her father's voice. Because you need to hide the body? We can hide the body in the garbage behind the diner. Why do we come all the way out here? An hour away from the city, in the middle of a remote field with no one around for miles. So no one ever finds the body, Daddy. Violet held her gaze at the woman's cracked skull. And? Her father crouched down to eye level and lifted her chin so their matching pale blue eyes were locked. So no one ever finds the body, and so no one ever finds out it was you who hid it. That's my girl. He patted her head gently, the intensity in his voice vanishing as if it were non-existent, and turned back to the body. They dragged the corpse deeper into the cornfield until they reached a yellow machine with a large opening in the front and long chute on the back. The side read Dr. Bark's Everlasting Industrial Chipper. He put the large black plastic bag on the end of the chute and flicked the machine on. It hummed loudly to life, and its sound echoed across the vacant field. I never want to see you dumb yourself down again. Not like you did today with your mama. Never again. Understand me? And don't you try to act like you don't know what I'm talking about, because we both know you do. Your mama is one of the smartest women alive. She knows you better than you know you, which means there is no one better to catch you in a lie. Well, maybe only second to me. Yes, Daddy. She fought back tears. Good. Now help me lift the legs. Together, they lifted the limp corpse and shoved her into the large opening. There was a loud squelch as bone and muscle churned within the sharp blades. The bag rippled like a flag as it filled with the chopped chunks. Her father stopped the machine once the corpse had become fully unrecognizable. The blades were coated in enough blood to be an investigator's wet dream, but her father came prepared. He was always prepared. He spread clumps of animal fur from a small bag in his pocket around the ground near the machine. It was a practice he had done so often that the farmer who owned the land truly believed the machine could be accidentally turned on by an animal. They walked back to the car, using their shoes to brush away the dragging tracks and footsteps in the soft dirt. Her father helped her into her seat, and before he closed the door, she twisted around to see her dad tossing the black garbage bag into the trunk. It made a squishing sound and jiggled violently when it landed. He made eye contact with her. I love you, Vi. Don't you ever forget that. He smiled wickedly. Violet's eyes opened slowly. The alarm on her phone had been blasting for 3 solid minutes. She picked her hand up slowly and stopped the alarm before rolling out of bed. Across the room, she could see her deep, dark bags under her eyes in the bathroom mirror. She felt as ill-rested as she looked. The twin in the mirror glared back at Violet with intense blue eyes. Fuck you, Dad. Chapter 7. Meeting of the Minds. They journeyed from all over the state, drawn by the strange and bizarre killings terrorizing the city's wide array of murderers and serial killers. If I lit a match right now, I'd make a crater in front of the station. Why did they all decide hairspray would be the best thing to spray in a crowd? The endless muttering amongst the thinly spaced groups of people made it almost impossible to hear what any of them were saying. Half of their viewers are only going to see a background full of someone else reporting on the same subject. Violet waited at the base of the platform that held the speaker's podium. It was the largest group of reporters she had seen since the fateful day when she and her family had broken free of their chains. It was not a day she remembered fondly. Mount Zebulun's killer of killers, a true white knight for the families of the victims, or a black knight for the perpetrators of violence. One of the reporters' voices broke through, snapping Violet to attention. Did she just say knight? The reporter was much younger than the others. She wore an outfit that looked like she spent a lot of time in coffee shops for the free Wi-Fi and carried only her phone on the end of a stick. For that very reason, this vengeful killer has been dubbed the Black Knight Killer, a serial killer of serial killers. If the camera had turned slightly to the left and away from the young reporter's face, it would have perfectly captured all the blood leaving Violet's face. Violet's stomach turned, and she suddenly felt as if everyone in the front row was staring at her, sensing her guilt. Do they already know? Is that why they have all gathered here? To trap me and expose me all in the same move? Violet's hands shook as she felt in her coat pocket for her key ring and the smallest key attached to it. For half a moment, she considered slipping it and dumping it into the sewer drain right in front of her. The Black Knight Killer? How could they be so close to my name? You feel it too? Serenity's voice said somberly from behind her. Violet tensed, then shimmied the tiny key off the ring and gripped it tightly in her hand that was still hidden in her jacket pocket. Is this it, Serenity? Did I leave a wide trail for you to follow? It's okay. It reminds me of that day too. We can get through this. Instantly, Violet relaxed. It felt as though a bus had been taken off her shoulders. Her sister wasn't about to put her in cuffs after all. She dropped the key into her jacket pocket. Her heart was still beating out of her chest. I'd rather not talk about that here, nor probably ever, Violet replied more coldly than she intended. Serenity moved next to her sister and gave a nervous smile. One day you will have to talk about it with someone, you know? Anyways, how do I look? She did a small twist to show off her outfit. She was in her slim black suit with high heels. Her badge and gun were displayed proudly on either side of her hips. You look like Malibu Barbie went to law school. So, hot and intimidating? Very. Violet forced a smile. For a second, this was going to be the end of our peaceful relationship, sister. Serenity smiled for a moment before hardening her face. Time to face the people, she muttered quietly to herself. She walked up the platform to the podium. Violet was almost blinded by the flash of cameras and deafened by the instant burst of excited chatter as her sister approached the podium. Detective! Detective! They shouted, each trying to get Serenity to face their camera. In that moment, both sisters shared a memory of walking out of a small suburban home towards an ambulance at the end of the driveway as the reporters flashed their lights and called, "Little girls!" Little girls! Serenity took a deep breath. If you will all quiet down for the time being, I assure you that I will address your questions in good time. It took a few minutes, but eventually the crowd became silent. However, the flashes never stopped. Thank you. As many of you know, there has been an ongoing investigation into the disappearances of Angelica Harding, Ruth Barlow, and Jessie Hand. All vanished after each took a trip to the Mount Zebulun Mall. Based on the similar physical attributes, the last known location, and disposal of the remains, we believe their abductor was the same man. The crowd rose in volume once again. Detective, was it Edward Codd? One reporter in the front shouted at the top of her lungs, extending her microphone-armed hand so hard towards Serenity that Violet was shocked her arm didn't pop out of its socket. At this time, we do have reasonable suspicion that a security guard at the Mount Zebulun Mall, a man by the name of Edward Codd, was both the abductor and eventual killer of both Angelica Harding and Ruth Barlow. Violet could see her older sister regretting agreeing to do the press conference. Serenity tightened her grip around the edge of the podium. Detective Knight, does this have anything to do with the Black Knight killer? The reporter with just the smartphone on a stick asked from the front row. Violet examined her more closely. The short hair poking out beneath her beanie was dyed pure white on one side and black on the other. She was the strangest-looking reporter Violet had ever seen. Serenity looked down at the young reporter. Is that what they are calling him? Serenity's face twisted ever so slightly from her normal calm smile. Her sister really wanted to catch Edward Codd, except he got caught in another net, Violet's net. In her mind, she ticked an imaginary scoreboard. She was up 3-2 in a competition her sister knew nothing about, but Serenity was feeling the score to her very core. The Black Knight killer? The BKK? The killer of killers? He killed Edward Codd after making him confess to his dirty deeds, then showed the horror film to Codd's victims' families. The young reporter spoke quickly and for good reason. The other reporters were beginning to ask their questions in a wave of words. If you could please all calm down, Serenity boomed. Our basis for believing Edward Codd is our murderer is found in eyewitness accounts. It is true that the families of the victims were shown a film of Edward Codd's confession before his ultimate murder. His connection with the mall and his confessed knowledge of the buried remains led him to be our prime suspect. We are hoping when Jessie Hand is stabilized and willing, she will also be able to confirm Edward as her abductor. Detective Knight, do you believe Edward Codd's body will be found? Is it possible for him to still be alive? A reporter shouted from the middle of the crowd. Again, based on the video footage described to us by the victims' families, we have minimal reason to believe Edward Codd is still at large. We are actively looking for his remains. Are there any leads on the Black Knight killer? Are you even attempting to find this killer? Another reporter shouted from the back row, very unsuccessfully. Violet held back a smile. To the crowd, Serenity didn't react in the slightest. To Violet, the slightest hint of frustration flickered in Serenity's eyes. Of course we are looking for him. The acts this Black Knight killer has enacted are vile and just as villainous as the people he is murdering. The act of murder is and will forever be deemed cruel and inhumane, and most importantly, a crime, Serenity replied. The crowd seemed to settle with that answer. I know you are all scared. Some of you drove all the way up here out of curiosity for how someone could perform such horrendous acts to another human being. Trust that we are looking for him, and when he makes a mistake, when he leaves one single crumb on the trail, I promise you all, we will be there to lock him up and throw away the key. One day you will see what I've done and what I will do, and you will understand it was necessary, sister. Those are all the case updates I can provide at this time. Thank you. Serenity left the podium with the boom of voices shouting up at her. One final question. The young reporter ran to the bottom of the stairs and cornered Serenity against the platform. Would you happen to be the same Serenity Knight as the little girl that was abducted with her mother by the Darsby Chipper in the late 90s? Serenity's eyes went wide for a second before her face hardened again. You are the strangest reporter I have ever met. The reporter locked eyes with Violet and smiled with glee and joy. It was the same look a little girl gives her lost puppy. The look made Violet very uneasy. I'm not a traditional reporter. Name is Lilith Helovich, host of the Afterlife podcast. I cover true crime stories, specifically in horrible murders. Morbid, Violet said plainly. You would be surprised how much people want to hear the morbid. They crave it like candy. People want to know what it is like to be murdered, to feel the same pain as the families, to mourn for people they never knew. I think it is quite beautiful. Lilith looked off into the distance with a whimsical smile before turning her camera onto Violet. So, you must be Violet Knight of the Night Sisters? I didn't know we had a name, Violet said, looking at Serenity. Either way, we don't talk about what happened in our childhood, especially with people we don't know. Violet didn't attempt to hide her disdain. Excuse my sister's attitude. She is still working on her people skills. What happened to our family in Darsby, Kansas, has long been put to rest and is a very private matter. Serenity gave Lilith a gentle smile and patted her younger sister's shoulder. Oh, totally get it. Lilith said, zooming the camera in on the two sisters. What he put your family through would have messed me up for life. She snapped a picture of Serenity and Violet, then turned the camera and took a photo with all three of them, Lilith being the only one smiling. Well, you guys have a good day. I'm sure we will be seeing each other around while I investigate the Black Knight killer. Lilith walked away into the crowd of reporters packing up their equipment. She was weird and kind of intense, right? Serenity asked. Very.